I watched a wing of nuclear missiles that could end a war in 30 minutes go completely dark, all at once, with no warning and no explanation. And I understood, standing in that control room at 19 years old, that something had just happened that nobody above me was going to have an answer for either. I'm 79 years old now, and I still don't have that answer. Nobody ever gave me one. March 1967, Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. I was a young airman working missile maintenance on one of the most powerful deterrent forces this country had ever built. A system designed to be reliable above almost anything else, because the whole point of it was that it could never afford to fail. That night, it failed. Not because of anything wrong with the equipment. Nobody ever explained why. I grew up on a ranch outside a small town in central Montana, cattle country, winters cold enough to freeze a man's breath solid in his own beard by January. I enlisted in the Air Force at 18, trained in missile systems maintenance, and got assigned to Malmstrom, which felt at the time like about the most important posting a young airman from a cattle ranch could hope for. Malmstrom housed part of the nation's Minuteman missile force, dozens of silos spread across the Montana countryside, each one holding a piece of the strategic deterrent that, we were told plainly during training, existed to make sure a war like that never actually had to be fought at all. There was a senior technician on my crew, a steady man named Robert Doss, who'd been working that system since it first went operational. These missiles are built to be the most reliable machines this country's ever made, he told me my first week on the crew. The whole idea only works if they never fail. Remember that. March 1967 started like any other stretch of duty, cold and routine, checking systems, running diagnostics, the particular quiet discipline of a job that mattered enormously, and, on any given ordinary night, looked like almost nothing happening at all. Then came a report moving fast through the chain of command that something unusual had been sighted near one of the missile flights. An object in the sky that didn't match anything anybody could immediately identify, hovering, according to the security personnel who reported it, in a way that didn't behave like any aircraft they'd ever been trained to recognize. Doss and I were in the control room when the first alarm started coming in, missile after missile in that flight showing loss of function almost simultaneously. Guidance and control systems going offline in a pattern that made no operational sense at all. "That's not possible," Doss said, quiet, staring at a board that was telling him something his training said couldn't happen. Not like this, not all at once. I remember the particular tension in that room, men trained for exactly this kind of technical crisis, suddenly facing something none of their training had actually prepared them for. Every diagnostic we ran came back the same way. Systems functioning perfectly on their own internal checks, and yet reading as offline, disabled, entirely outside the normal parameters we understood. Doss worked the problem methodically, running through every standard explanation available to him: equipment malfunction, electromagnetic interference, a maintenance error somewhere down the line. Nothing fit. The failures had happened too fast, too simultaneously across missiles that had no operational connection to each other beyond simply being part of the same flight. Security reports kept coming in about that unidentified object hovering near the affected site. And I want to be honest with you, nobody in that room that night said the word people use for that kind of thing now, not out loud, not officially. We just worked the problem in front of us and tried not to think too hard about the timing. By morning, technicians had restored function to the affected missiles, one at a time, through procedures that felt, even to men who understood that system better than almost anyone, more like careful troubleshooting than actual diagnosis. We never identified a root cause. Not that night, not in the days that followed, not in any official explanation that ever reached men like me and Doss, who'd been standing right there when it happened. I remember asking a superior officer a few days later whether anybody had figured out what caused it. He looked at me a long moment before he answered, careful in a way that told me plenty, even though his actual words gave away almost nothing. It's being looked into. That's all I can tell you. Doss and I talked about it quietly between ourselves for years afterward, never in any official capacity, just two men who'd watched something happen that neither one of us could explain, and that nobody with authority over us ever seemed willing to explain either. I finished my enlistment a couple years later, and came home to Montana, carrying that particular unanswered question with me, the way you carry anything strange enough that it doesn't fully fit anywhere in an ordinary life. I didn't talk about it much, not because I'd been told not to exactly, but because there wasn't really a way to bring it up that didn't sound stranger than I was comfortable sounding. Doss and I stayed in touch over the years, and every so often, usually late at night over the phone, one of us would bring it up again, still turning it over, still without any better answer than we'd had standing in that control room decades before. "You ever think somebody somewhere knows what that was?" he asked me once, years later. I told him I honestly didn't know anymore whether I hoped somebody did or hoped nobody ever would. A few years back, long retired, I came across published accounts from other airmen who'd served at missile bases during that same period, describing incidents remarkably similar to what I'd witnessed: unexplained objects, simultaneous system failures, official responses that acknowledged something had happened without ever explaining what or why. Reading those accounts decades after the fact, sitting in my own kitchen in Montana with the same kind of quiet cattle country stretching outside my window that I'd grown up in, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not vindication exactly, though there was some of that. Something closer to a strange, complicated relief, understanding, finally, that I hadn't imagined the strangeness of that night, that other men at other bases had stood in rooms just like mine and watched something just as inexplicable happen to systems built to be the most reliable machines this country had ever made. I still don't have an explanation. I don't know that I ever will. But I understand now that whatever happened that March night wasn't a failure of American engineering or American reliability. It was something else entirely, something that sat outside every category our training had prepared us to understand. Robert Doss passed a few years back now, and one of the last conversations we ever had was about that same night, still turning it over together after nearly 6 decades, still without any better answer than the one we'd started with. I sat with those published accounts a long while after I first read them, understanding something settle in me that I hadn't expected to feel that late in life. Not every question needs an answer to stop being lonely. Sometimes it just needs company. Other men, other rooms, the same particular strangeness, shared instead of carried alone. That was enough in the end, more than I'd thought it would be. I built a quiet life back in Montana after my enlistment ended, married a local woman named Carol, raised 2 children on land not far from where I grew up, and spent most of my working years in equipment maintenance, work that always felt, in some small way, connected to the discipline I'd learned standing watch over that missile flight. I never made a public thing out of what happened that night. talked about it with Doss, talked about it eventually with my wife, late one evening years into our marriage when the subject came up naturally. She listened the way she always did with the parts of my service that didn't have tidy endings, without needing me to resolve it for her. I drove out to Doss's funeral a few years back, stood in a small church in Montana, thinking about that control room more than I thought about almost anything else that whole day. I've got grandchildren now who've heard bits and pieces of this story, and I tell them every time the same honest thing I've told everyone else who's ever asked. I don't know what happened that night. I know what I saw and what I watched fail, and what nobody ever fully explained to men who deserved, I think, at least an honest answer about equipment we'd trusted our lives and our country's safety to. I think that's the part of my service worth remembering most honestly. Not a clean story with a clear lesson, but a genuine unanswered question that I've carried, without resolution, for nearly 60 years now. Some nights I still stand out on the porch a while before bed, looking up at that same Montana sky. It never gives me anything back. I look anyway.